they're essentially the ones that are left out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's unbelievable to me that they can come out and ignore the sun. I mean, everybody knows the sun goes in, it gets cool. You notice that, right? You have an eclipse, the temperature drops, and the birds start to get excited and so on. And when you look at the seasonal changes with the sun, how you can suggest that the sun is not a factor is really quite remarkable.
Giving us false scientific information is not going to clean up our environment. Speaking with a lot of promises and innuendo is not going to help clean up our environment.
The globalists have co-opted the environmental movement. There are a lot of real environmental problems we face, like genetic engineering, where they're splicing plants, animals, insects, you name it. Toxic waste dumping in the ocean. No one wants to breathe bad air or drink toxic water. But the global carbon tax has nothing to do with that. It's a tax literally on breathing. Go out on the street or talk to your friends, your neighbors. Ask them, hey, should we ban dihydrogen monoxide? It's bad for the environment. The average person will sign your petition calling for the banning of water. That's right. Dihydrogen monoxide is water. It's the same thing with table salt, sodium chloride. And that's exactly what the establishment is doing with carbon dioxide. Ooh, dioxide. It has this scary sounding name. But the truth is, it's one of the 4 elements of life on this planet. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. And if the establishment can tax and list as a toxic waste one of those basic 4 building blocks of life, carbon dioxide, they can regulate and control every facet of our lives and shut down any businesses that aren't part of their New World Order.
The idea that carbon is a pollutant is essentially a way of saying that humanity is a disease or a cancer that ought to be wiped out. Genocide. People have argued in this environmental coterie around Obama, around Holdren, the theoretician of de-development, who is now the science advisor of the White House, really the anti-science advisor. They've argued that babies are carbon monsters, carbon machines, and that every time you breathe out carbon dioxide, you're part of the pollution of the planet. This is an absolutely anti-human doctrine.
They use the environmental movement to promote their real agenda, which is globalization and federalization and power.
The advisor to Gordon Brown wants to exterminate 1/2 of the population of the British Isles. Now that's something Hitler might have tried to do, or Stalin. They didn't succeed. Will Gordon Brown do it? You can read this in the statements of these lunatics, radical environmentalists, fanatical Malthusians, tree huggers, whatever you want to call them. This is an ideology of genocide which can be documented exhaustively, ad nauseum, out of their own statements.
When Gore said the science is settled, that raised red flags amongst the media, and then also amongst a lot of other people that sort of knew that that wasn't true, other scientists, and started to look at it. And of course, the more they looked at it, the more they realized, no, science is never settled.
What is coming down now is environmentalism, is nothing but phony science. Nothing but phony science. And if we really believe in the environment, if we really believe in freedom, if we really believe in truth, we need to get some straight answers.
Now, the Kyoto Agreement, of course, was reached in the city of Kyoto. And what was interesting was several things came out of that. But the first thing was that not all countries had to participate in Kyoto, but not all had to take action. Only the developed nations were required to reduce their level of CO2. The developing nations were excluded. Now, of course, at that time, China was, and in some ways you can argue it still is, a developing nation. So it wasn't required to meet any targets under Kyoto, nor was India. The U.S., of course, held out. And what's interesting is that the U.S. Senate voted 95-0 against the Kyoto Accord, even though Al Gore was the vice president at the time. And lucky for him, he didn't have to cast a deciding vote. But so it was 95-0 against it, because the U.S. Senate saw, no, this is a socialist distribution of wealth. This is going to cost jobs and economy, and so they scrapped it completely.
We're now told that you have to buy carbon offsets. In other words, if you have sinned by having a carbon footprint and by carbon emissions, you've got to buy a carbon offset, which is usually a scam. Somebody claims to have planted an acre of grass in the third world. It never happened. They take your money and laugh all the way to the bank. But they're telling you that in order to cleanse your guilt, you've got to buy a carbon offset.
Talk about carbon polluters. You talk about them. It's my understanding that back in 1997, when you were vice president, Enron's CEO, Ken Lay, was involved in discussions with you at the White House about helping develop this type of policy, this trading scheme. And is that accurate? Is it inaccurate? It's been reported.
I don't know, but I met with Ken Lay, as lots of people did, before anybody knew that he was a crook.
Right, and clearly you can see why so many of us are concerned about this type of cap-and-trade energy tax that would be literally turning over this country's energy economy.
I didn't know him well enough to call him Kenny Boy.
Well, but you knew him well enough to help devise this trading scheme, and obviously we know what Enron and these big guys on Wall Street like Goldman Sachs, and I know you've got interest with Goldman Sachs.
No.
Well, that's been reported. Is that not accurate?
No, I wish I did.
With executives from you're partnered in companies with executives from Goldman Sachs. Well, if you're not.
Al Gore has got to be the greatest con artist in modern history. This guy claims he invented the internet, even though it's on record he's a liar, and he got away with it. He was the pitch man that successfully sold, as vice president, NAFTA and GATT, that's lowered the standard of living in the United States and Mexico and almost completely deindustrialized our country. Now he's saying you should pay him and his private company, set up by Enron, a carbon tax on breathing. Look, if you want to buy Al Gore's propaganda, go ahead. But before you do that, you should at least look into the claims he's making.
There was a meeting in the White House in 1998 between Al Gore and Bill Clinton, Ken Lay, and Lord Brown. Okay, well, who were these people? Well, we know the president, the vice president. Ken Lay, of course, was the president of Enron. And Enron was a major player in the carbon credit, carbon trading. And in fact, stood to make an enormous amount of money out of it. And so it was part of I think, part of the collapse of Enron. And Lord Brown, of course, was the head of the largest oil company in the world. And they were looking to buy into this, as is happening now, where the energy companies are becoming the big promoters of, oh, we got to go green, we got to go to alternate energies, and all of this this stuff. They saw a business opportunity and leapt onto it, and one that would make them look green again.
When it came time for the 1,200-plus page greenhouse gas emission and carbon legislation to be voted on, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, would not let the Republicans, or even members of her own party, see the bill until minutes before the vote. Republican Minority Leader John Boehner engaged in a rare House filibuster and read shocking section after shocking section from the legislation.
Now, I really hate to do this, but when you file a 300-page amendment at 3:09 a.m., the American people have a right to know what's in this bill and have a right to know what we're voting on. Page 48. Each building code enforcement department receiving a grant under subsection A shall impanel a code administration and enforcement team consisting of at least one full-time building code enforcement officer, a city planner, and a health planner or similar officer. I can take you to Chickasaw, Mercer County in my district. They don't have one full-time person that works for the village, all right, not one. Look at the mandate on every city, village in America.